sentence, every chapter, everything that is there, points to the dying of Jesus on the cross. Why? Why?
Humanity saved.
Because he becomes vulnerable. How? The God, the all-powerful God, the one that has created the visible and the invisible, okay? The cosmos, everything, the stars, the galaxies, the black holes, everything that is out there, everything that we have knowledge of and the things that we don't know about, okay? Dies. There is nothing more humiliating for a human being than dying, than to discover that you are mortal. Because then you cannot exist anymore. You're nothing. Death destroys everything. And so the most vulnerable moment in the life of Jesus is dying on the cross. And Jesus, that's friendship, remember? That's love. Is letting the other person see you as you are. That he was not perfect in that sense, that he was not Superman or Spider-Man or one of those superheroes that can do anything and everything, but he was just vulnerable like any other human being. And that sometimes also deceiving another person is part of life too, because he had that experience, being betrayed, okay? That's part of it. Anyway, so that's what it is. Very good. There are a few things that I want to bring up about the two texts that we read, the one from Matthew and also from Mark. There are two different traditions. One, Matthew wrote his gospel for whom? Who's the audience in the gospel of Matthew? The Jews. No Jews. Jewish Christian people. No Jews. Because Jews are Jews, Christians are Christians. At this moment, Christianity has a lot of Judaism or Jewish stuff. Okay? And they're trying to separate themselves from Judaism because a new religion is being born. Okay? But most of the Christians, so Matthew is a priest, he's a shepherd of this community. So most of them are coming from Judaism and they have converted to Christianity. They're following the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay? So when Matthew talks about marriage, it's from the Jewish perspective that he writes when he writes about matrimony. Why? Because when he says in the gospel, there is one thing. The only ones that were able to have a divorce were who?
The infidelity.
Yeah, that's one thing. And actually, he says, okay, I found it here. I say to you, whoever divorces his wife unless the marriage is unlawful, and marries another commits adultery. His disciples said to him, if that is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry. He answered, no, not all can accept his word, but only those to whom that is granted. Okay, so if you pay attention, in the Gospel of Matthew, you are going to find in between parentheses, unless the marriage is unlawful. Why is that there in parentheses? Because that sentence was added by the early Christian community. It was not part of the original Matthean text. It was not there. Why the early Christian community added that sentence there? Unless the marriage is unlawful. Why? Because Paul is going to talk about some of that in his letters, where some of those marriages the problems that we see nowadays in marriages is the same thing that Paul and the disciples experienced way back then. Christians, Catholics married with non-Christians, all kinds of things. Okay? And so, that means that the early church granted or was able to understand the situations that people had in their lives. People think that all those terrible cases that sometimes you have to deal with are new. No. The apostles had to deal with some of those things. Read Paul. Paul talks about marriage. And he says, he exhorts, I think it's in the letter to the Corinthians, he says, he exhorts the Christians that are marrying non-Christians and are participating in their pagan sacrifices. And they're coming back and they're partaking of the Eucharist. And Paul gets so mad at them. He gets very, very, very angry at them because of that. Okay? So that's one thing. What does Mark say? Mark say, chapter 10. Let's see what Mark says. I'm getting tired standing here. Okay, verse 11. He said to them, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her, and if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. That's not what Matthew says. Why?
Different audience.
Who is the audience?
Christians in Rome.
They came from, they're Christians now, but they came from where? They're Gentiles, they paid their pagans. Very good. Is that all? I wanna know. What is the difference between Matthew and Mark? What does Matthew say about divorce? Whomever, what does Matthew say? Just read it. What does Matthew say?
Commits adultery.
The woman commits adultery is what it said on the first one.
No, the second one. That was Mark.
Oh.
Okay,
You're
very
obviously
good.
tired.
You are getting there. But what does Matthew say? Does Matthew mention women getting divorces?
No.
Who is able to divorce in the Jewish tradition?
Only men.
Only men. So when Matthew is talking about marriage and divorces, he's only talking about from the perspective of Judaism.
Oh, I know.
When men are the only ones that are allowed under Jewish law to divorce their wives. Women were not allowed to divorce in the Jewish tradition.
Romans were.
Yes,
Show on.
very good. Why?
The Roman law allowed women to divorce their husbands.
Very good. Excellent.
You know,
The ones that invented law were Romans. When you go to study law, you have to study the classics. Who are the classics? The Romans, because they were the ones that invented law. So the Roman law, the Gospel of Mark is letting us see the culture in which the Gospel was written. It was written in Rome and is reflecting the Roman culture. Under the Roman culture, not only men were allowed to divorce their wives, but women also were allowed to divorce their husbands under Roman law. Very good.
I just finished a series on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the author, Dr. John Bergsma, talked about the differences between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And the Sadducees...
They're two different groups, totally.
The Sadducees were very upset with the Pharisees because the Pharisees were like contract sharpshooters. They would always find these reasons to get around the law, and they were very liberal in their interpretation of divorce. And so the Pharisees were out there divorcing a lot more than other Jewish groups.
Okay, so that's what it is. So let's go to I think is paragraph number 4. So the intimate community of life and love by which spouses are no longer two but one flesh has been established by God the Creator. So what is marriage? What is it? It is a covenant. It's sacred. It's divine institution. It is the sign of God. See? That's what the church is teaching. Okay? Why? Because it comes from the Bible. Now, what is this intimate community of life and love? Where does intimate community of life and love come from? Where does it come from? What is marriage supposed to mirror, supposed to reflect? The life of? Very good. That's where the theology comes from. Provided with its own proper laws and endowed with that blessing which alone was not forfeited by punishment for original sin, this sacred bond therefore does not depend on human choice. Human choice. It's not between two men or two women. Human choice. Does not depend on human choice, but rather on the author of marriage who ordained it to be endowed with his own goods and ends. Okay? Very good. Indeed, Christ the Lord, making a new creation and making all things new, has willed that marriage be restored to its primordial form and holiness in such a way that what God has joined together, no one may put asunder. That's the expression that Matthew uses. And that's the expression that you are going to use here in the right, because that is there. No one may put asunder. The other thing that is very interesting, okay, one of the very primordial foundations of marriage is what? Of course, is love, is procreation, and what else? Is fidelity. Fidelity. Okay? It is supposed to reflect the relationship between God and His people. In the Old Testament, I think it's the book of the prophet Hosea, if I'm not mistaken. There are two prophets that speak about this image of the relationship between God and His people. And the image that they use to explain or to talk about the relationship between God and His people is between the husband and a wife. The husband in the Old Testament in this relationship is God, and the wife, the bride, is going to be Israel. Okay? So Israel, in many different cases, I think it's the prophet Amos who gets married to a prostitute.
Hosea.
Is Hosea? Okay. So he, while he's preaching the word of God, what is she doing?
She's out fooling around.
Yes. Okay, so the life of the prophet becomes, okay, a parallel of the life between God and His people. So every time that Israel goes to worship another God, goes astray, she becomes a prostitute. Okay? Not only that, but also what that's showing us from the Old Testament, that this God in this covenantal relationship is what? He is faithful. 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 What does fidelity, faithfulness bring into a relationship?
Trust.
Very good. Yes. What else?
Peace.
Yeah.
Stability.
Stability, very good. Integrity. Big word. Integrity. What makes to have a relationship to be stable, to have the trust, is to be faithful, is to have integrity. And it's upon those things how you build upon this relationship is faithfulness. If I am faithful to God in my ministry, I'm building my ministry in integrity. Because the first question that people are going to ask about a priest is his integrity. So when the integrity is questioned, what happens to the relationship? What happens to the covenant?
It's weakened.
It's weakened,
Vulnerable.
becomes vulnerable, yes. Okay? And this is one of the pillars for that relationship of the covenant in matrimony, integrity, being faithful, being faithful. There is a very famous phrase by Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I was not promised to be famous by God, but He promised me to be faithful. Or something like that. It's because it's not fame what it's all about. It's about being faithful. That's what it is all about. That's how you build upon it. Okay? Now, there are going to be moments that are going to be very difficult, and we are going to see that also in the first sign that we read in chapter 2 of the Gospel of John, where things sometimes don't go very well. So, and that's the theological explanation also of marriage, where the best wine was left for last, and the worst wine, because Jesus told the bride and the groom, you know, most of the time the best wine is served at the beginning, and the best wine is served at last. But he says, you chose better. Why? What is wine? What is the image? Why? What is the image of wine in scriptures? What does wine do to you when you drink it?
Joyful.
Yeah, it brings joy to life. It's also a sign of love. Okay? So that's why it's there as well. Because people, by drinking wine, fall in love too. Okay? Yeah, that's why you like other people. That's why you probably fell in love over a glass of wine. Who knows? I don't know. But anyway. So that's also, wine is the love of God. He chose Christ over anything else in his marriage life. Because when people get married, okay, and you have all those expectations, and many times those expectations are not fulfilled, and so you get tired, and many times that love is killed, because one of you is going to think that you're giving your 100%, and the other person is not giving that. And in every single relationship, it's going to be like that. There is one that is going to give more, and the other one is going to give less. It doesn't mean that the person that is giving less, it loves you less. But that's how relationships work. And that has happened to you in the history of your relationships. And so there is going to be a time in your marriage life that everything goes boring. Why did I get married to this person? You're going to start having those doubts you have had in you. You go into a crisis. What am I doing here? I met this lady, I met this guy. He seems to be more interesting than this person that I got married to. And so that's what that text is telling us. Is when the jars were empty. So when we love, humanly speaking, the other person, we get tired of loving the other person. Faithfulness is a very difficult thing. It's not easy. And the person or the couple that says that they have had a perfect marriage, big liar. Because life is not like that. Big liar. And I preach this during my weddings. And I say, how many of you are married? And some people will raise their hands. You know what I'm talking about, right? They say, yeah. And sometimes they laugh. Because I know that I'm putting the finger in the wound, you know? Just because of it. The only one that is able to give us the love that we need to love the other person and to be faithful to the other person is Jesus, nobody else. Even in the most difficult times in a relationship, He is the only one that is going to be able to save this relationship. To be faithful. Sometimes people go nuts, sometimes people lose their memory, sometimes people behave in ways that you don't understand. But this is not the person that I got married to. I have heard that many different times. Why is he, she acting this way? It's like you are married to a whole different person from the one that you married 20, 30, whatever years ago. Right? Such is life. C'est la vie in Latin. But, fidelity. That's the foundation of it all. And that's going to be tested. Not only for you, but also for me. Because that happens to all of us. And sometimes that's the struggle, everyday struggle. It's difficult, it's very hard. And sometimes you wonder, am I going to make it today? And if you don't pray, and if you are not faithful to that relationship, guess what? The devil is going to come in and he's going to, boom, take you by your weakest link, you know? So faithfulness is very important. Pray, 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 pray. And pray. Never get tired of praying. And sometimes even that is going to get boring. Yes.
At your parish, when someone wants to get married, do you let them choose their readings?
Yeah, sometimes. So most of the time people want to have the readings be chosen for them because they're so busy trying to get everything ready, you know, the place and all that stuff. So they don't want to deal with that.
Do you ever choose Tobit?
That's a beautiful reading. Amazing reading. Yes.
Tobit and Rachel?
Yes. When he takes her by the hands, they kneel down and then they pray this prayer that is so beautiful, thanking God for her. Yes. Okay, my time is up.
Thank you, Father.
There is only 4 paragraphs that we just read, not even 4.
You give us a lot.
Okay. That's good.
I think we could teach for like 6 more sessions. It would be so interesting.
That's good.
Well, you does marriage retreats too.
What's that?
You do